I'll introduce the breast ovarian cancer syndrome. I think many are familiar, so I won't be going through too much of the details, but some of the highlights and some of the things pertinent to this meeting. Well, I've been studying this since 1987, as it's a couple of people in the room. These are not the only milestones, but the ones I personally have been involved in. I mean, started in 1987 with Henry Lynch and Gilbert Lenoir. Genes discovered BRCA1 and BRCA2 in 1994 and 95. I think it's fair to say that of all the genes discovered since, none have had the impact of BRCA1 and 2 clinically, certainly not in the Jewish population. These are the main standard genes that are the predominant genes for cancer in all breast and ovarian cancer. And the 3 mutations discovered, I think Ken Offit, Susan Newhouse, we were involved, and others in 94 and 95, happened very quickly. They're still the predominant found mutations in Jews. As far as I know, there's been no other common mutation in Jews found since 1995. In other words, within 2 years of the discovery of the genes, those 3 mutations were established and Jewish panels were introduced. In fact, if we skip forward to 2016, it's still about the same estimates that we had 20 years ago. About 12% of breast cancers in Jews in Israel, New York, Canada, 12% of breast cancers due to the 3 mutations, about between 30 and 40% of ovarian cancers, which is a pretty enormous fraction. I mean, well, it's not that these were rare, but when you think 30% of all ovarian cancers invasive in Israel due to these mutations, gives you an opportunity to think of prevention. We've been testing Jewish women in Ontario unselected since 2007. In my hospital, we've been offering essentially, I haven't refused a woman, Jewish woman in Women's College Hospital, testing for the 3 mutations since 2007. So any Jewish woman in Ontario can come into my office and we'll get a free test for those mutations. So here we are back in the day, Gilbert Lenoir, Henry Lynch, and myself. This is going back to the early days. So clinical milestones, we're just going to sort of review some of the things quickly. Preventive mastectomy was shown to prevent breast cancer 20 years ago. Hasn't yet been shown to reduce death from breast cancer. It reduces the incidence. Preventive oophorectomy prevents incidence of ovarian cancer as well as all-cause death. Some controversy about whether or not it prevents breast cancer. Looks like it prevents breast cancer in BRCA2, but not in BRCA1. So we no longer recommend oophorectomy as a reason to prevent breast cancer, but it's very effective in preventing ovarian cancer. That paper is coming out in JNCI soon. Tamoxifen prevents contralateral breast cancer. It hasn't been shown to prevent primary breast cancer in BRCA1. MRI is effective, reduces down stages of cancers, but hasn't been yet shown to reduce mortality. We have some new data coming out on that. BRCA1 triple negative has been shown by Will Fox and others, and we've been using cisplatin in Poland for about 10 years now to treat breast cancer. So we treated 180 primary breast cancers, neoadjuvant cisplatin. Shows a very good effect on neoadjuvant PCR, hasn't yet been shown to reduce mortality. So these are some of the clinical milestones. These are the incident cancers in the cohort. I should say we follow 13,000 women. This is up to 2016 with BRCA1 mutations. Of the ones without a cancer diagnosis at baseline, so these are of the 13,000 women, about 1,000 got breast cancer since they enrolled in since they enrolled in the study. You can see predominantly breast, ovarian, parenchymal, and fallopian cancers. There are a few other cancers, but they're relatively rare. Of interest, we have 41 women who had an oophorectomy and got a parenchymal cancer, about 2% of the cohort in 10 years. So you can see preventing breast and ovarian cancer is going to be the goal. We've got 39 endometrial cancers, mostly due to tamoxifen and BRCA1 carriers with breast cancer. But the point is preventing ovarian and breast cancer should be our focus. And if you look at the deaths from these women, again, the majority of deaths were from breast and ovarian cancer. Many of those women had cancer when they entered the cohort, so they're not deaths in the incident cases, they're just in the prevalent cases. Important, who has a mutation? What's the risk of cancer if a mutation is found? This is very important, especially if you do population screening. So among breast cancer patients, this is among patients with cancer, the age of onset is important, the family history is important, the pathology is important, in particular for triple-negative breast cancers. We should remember that the triple-negative paradigm, which was established for BRCA1, led to the use of genetic testing for people priority with triple-negative breast cancer is entirely dependent on the BRCA1 association. If we're starting to extend that to 19 genes, the only one, as far as I know, that's restricted or really associated with triple-negative BRCA1, it does no longer make sense to make triple-negative breast cancer a prime criteria for genetic testing and then test for genes which are predominantly ER positive like CHEK2. I mean, I could go on for an hour about that, but we don't have time. Well, that's kind of off to talk about that. Now, ethnic group, we're here to study ethnic groups. I loosely speak of Ashkenazi Jews or Jews as an ethnic group. So the idea that an ethnic group is based on, predicts testing is based on two phenomena. One, the old one, it's cheaper to test for family mutations and genome sequencing, may no longer be the critical factor. When I gave this same talk 10 years ago, we used to say, well, we test for Jews because it's cheap, and it costs thousands of dollars for tests for non-Jews. That's not a good reason anymore. But the frequencies are still the same. So it's the prevalence of mutations in Jews about 1.5 to 2% versus 1 in 400, means there's a more higher posterior probability of finding mutation. Secondly, it's founding mutations, but it's not that much cheaper, so I'm not sure I can make that case anymore. We know what founding mutations are, if you've been paying attention. So the important founding mutations are, I kind of listed, they're not just the only ones, but the ones I'm most familiar with. BRCA1 mutations predominantly, we see founder effects in both genes in Jews, and we see BRCA1. If you want to study BRCA1, you go to Poland and the Bahamas. If you want to study BRCA2, you go to Iceland, a small country, 300,000 people, but about 1% of them carry a single BRCA2 mutation. And we've been doing that. China, big country, lots of mutations, it's evolving, but most seem to be in BRCA2. Again, these other populations, Jeff Weitzel will talk, there's a very strong founder effects in Mexico and Colombia, like really impressive. Hasn't yet been exploited, but Jeff will talk about that. French Canadians and Jews keep coming up, which is interesting for me because my son is half French Canadian and half Ashkenazi. We know why they're important, but in particular, they were important a lot more today because testing was cheap. There were the days where we could test founding mutations on tumor blocks. I did it with Gadi Renner, we'll talk about that. I think 10 years ago, we took thousands of tumor slides and tested them. Couldn't do that. Testing was cheaper. We could test saliva, but now they can test saliva. One can test more things. Basically, we did a bunch of large studies. We did it on unselected patients. We did it on healthy women. We couldn't do that in a day. We're using a $3,000 test. Okay, so let's get to the focus. There's 3 mutations common in Jews. 1 in BRCA2, 6174 delta T, 2 in BRCA1. So this is my database. This isn't a selection of the population. These are just information I collected on 13,000 women, put together this slide the last week for the talk. And it makes a bit of sense, but not much. But you'll notice, for example, of 1,979 Jewish women, which I've data on, the majority of the breast cancer, these are patients with cancer mostly, so the 185 del AG is the most common. But interesting, if you look at patients in the general population, 6174 del T is more common in BRCA2 than del AG. And the reason is because the penetrance is much higher for the BRCA1 mutation, so you get a lower frequency of mutations in affected people, but a higher one in unaffected people. Interestingly, this 5383 insertion C Polish mutation is, well, we have a lot of Poles, but you can see in our database, 56%, 80% of the people with that mutation are in fact Polish. They're not Jewish, they're Polish, and you can see they're really not Jewish because they don't have the other mutations. In other words, it's a Slavic mutation. It's been traced, I think, somewhere in the area of Minsk, if I'm not mistaken. But in this, it's common in Israel, but it's interesting. It's the only mutation, and I don't have really much information on genealogy, but it's the only mutation which is very common in Jews and non-Jews, Slavic, something about the Ashkenazi origin, where it came from, and at what point. But the other ones you can see, the 185 del AG in our database, the great majority are Jewish. The 6174 del T, the great majority of Jewish. Come back to that quickly. But you'll be surprised, Israel is not the country with the highest prevalence of mutations. Maybe that's good news or bad news. But Israel has about 12% of the breast cancer patients in Israel have a mutation, right? Which puts you in second place. The highest, in terms of prevalence, is the Bahamas, which has an extraordinary high prevalence of 23% of breast cancer and mutation. Small studies we did, we got every patient with breast cancer in the Bahamas for the past few years. Small island country, about 300,000 occupants. Went through two bottlenecks. Most of the common residents in the Bahamas are actually left from the United States to the Bahamas with plantation owners after the Civil War. They didn't come directly from Africa, or they came from the United States. So they went through two bottlenecks, I guess. Anyways, 22% of mutations. One mutation, the most common one, accounts for 10% of all breast cancer patients in the Bahamas. The Jewish mutations, again, the most common, 1,979 women we follow with these mutations, most common 185 del AG, 6174 del T, BRCA2 is quite common. So now in Poland, we have 3,791 carriers from Poland in the database, by far our largest contribution. And I'm just coming from Poland. I spend my summers there working with this information. But you see, we have 2,000 Polish women with a single mutation. Nice opportunity to study. Probably the only mutation in the world you can really study a single BRCA1 mutation is that one, based on the frequency in the Slavic population. It's in fact equally common probably in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and other, even northern Greece, Macedonia. Countries with a common Slavic origin tend to have that mutation. I sense the most common would be in the Ukraine, but our data from Ukraine is limited. I'm gonna skip ahead. These are interesting. I just did these last week. So we looked at we follow these women prospectively for cancer risk. So these are women without cancer who came into the database and got cancer in the follow-up period. Remember I said there was 1,000 new cancers. This represents the breast cancers. This was 400. So what I looked at here was actual risk of breast cancer in the carriers of BRCA1 mutations in green. This is a follow-up. It's not by age, it's by year of follow-up. So it should be a straight line, which it pretty much is. 2% a year, which is exactly what we expect. So 2% a year of BRCA1 carriers get breast cancer. The 185 del AG on the bottom, probably about the same, and the 5382 insertion C, maybe a little bit higher, but probably not really much. I mean, there's not much data after 8 years, but I think there may be a suggestion that that's a high-risk mutation, but not really significantly different. But this is pretty cool. So when we compared the Polish in red to the Jewish in black on the top, we see a higher penetrance. Slightly, not much data suggestive of something going on, but we do see a slightly higher significant difference in the Kaplan-Meier test. So that Jewish mutation, which has been called a high-risk mutation, 5382 insertion C, may in fact have a higher risk than in the non-Jewish population for reasons we don't know. Worth studying. Now these Jews are not from Israel. A few of them are, but Eitan Friedman and Gadi but most are from Ontario and the United States. Be interesting if we can compare that across the different countries, but we don't have enough information. This isn't very convincing, but it suggests, but this I think is convincing, and this is not the first time it's seen. I think it's the most convincing example that this 6174 del T, the single BRCA2 mutation that's common in Jews, the founder mutation in BRCA2, 6174 del T, is a low penetrance gene.
3 minutes.
Okay? So a low penetrance gene, the risk is about 1% a year. It's only half of that of the other BRCA2 mutations. But I think that's a fundamental clinical importance because people tend to give them the same risk. So I'm going to pretty much stop there. We've been testing genetic testing in our hospital since 2007. Just want to say that we had two genetic counselors. One saw referrals in the clinic in one room, another one just on selected Jewish patients in Jewish people in another room. Two counselors working side by side at the same time. In the same period of time, for 3 years, we identified 47 carriers through the clinic, 92 women just in the Jewish population of Ontario. Of the 92 women we identified in the Jewish population of Ontario, 91 were unaffected, as opposed to our clinical thing where 35 were unaffected, suggesting the same investment can give you a much better return testing unselected, unaffected Jewish women than doing the standard thing everybody's been doing for 20 years. 63% would have been missed. So I support, and they all have the same, 90% of them have been a mastectomy. So we recommend BRCA testing now, not only to all Jewish women, we think that's out of date, we're going to recommend it to all Canadian women, and we hope to be offering that in the next 2 years. Thanks.